Welcome, all of you, to our study of the Heart of Compassion, Instructions on Ngulchu Togmé, 37 verses on the practice of a bodhisattva by Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. So, as always, kindly reflect how this could be very helpful in terms of what's happening in this world. This addresses the cause of suffering universally. So it would be very good if we could try and practice it. And I'm very grateful to all of you for providing the occasion for me actually studying this text. So very happy that we could study this together. So we're presently then in part 2, which is then where the main path really is described in terms of 3 kinds of individuals. Those who wish to be happy, basically have a good rebirth, those who wish to be free of samsara, and then finally the person of superior capacity, those who wish to eliminate suffering universally for all beings. Now within that, then we're studying we looked at the bodhicitta of aspiration, we looked at the bodhicitta now presently of application. Now in there, we've looked at relative bodhicitta, like everything we covered last time was very much in terms of just our, very much conforms according to our experience. How do you say? To be perfectly honest, we are rather held, it might seem, by our dualistic perceptions, and that's where the advice on how to apply what we call relative bodhicitta, it really conforms with our particular situation as dualistic persons. At the same time, stuck in duality, as clever, as skillful as we might be in dealing with it, and as much as the instructions that we have there lead us into a vision of reality, then we certainly need to have some idea of what we really mean with reality itself, not just our relative experience, but how things actually are in what we then call the absolute truth. And this is then what we cultivate. This is where we cultivate what's called an absolute bodhicitta. We would also say relative bodhicitta is directed towards sentient beings. It's directed towards the mind of our relative experience of sentient beings, and also where we understand what sentient beings go through. Absolute bodhicitta is understanding how things actually are. So in that sense, relative bodhicitta has more an emphasis on compassion, and absolute bodhicitta more on wisdom. But this wisdom is what will set us free, so it's very important. This is actually seeing things for what they truly are. So we say meditation practice of remaining in a state free of conceptual elaborations without any clinging. So there's 2 here. In absolute bodhicitta we have that, and then we also have the post-meditation practice of abandoning any belief in the objects of desire and aversion as truly existing. So we're going to first look at the meditation practice of remaining in a state free of conceptual elaborations without any clinging. So it means that we stay in this meditation practice without clinging. And what is this meditation practice defined in terms of? It's that which is free from, and when we say conceptual elaborations, it means essentially reference points. It means philosophy, it means dogma, and it also means the assumptions basic to our very being, the belief in a self, the belief in phenomena as existing in a particular way as solid. And in fact, any time that we fall into this this way of clinging, pigeonholing, objectifying, holding as real anything. Phenomena don't have any reality. There's nothing about them that stand out and say, hey, I'm real. It's us who impute reality on things. So these ways in which we impute a reality on things in a way that they don't actually have, that is what we call conceptual elaborations. And we'll see it's quite, you could say it's quite insidious. It's quite rampant. It is something that needs to be dealt with, and that is why we then need to familiarize ourselves with this perspective through the practice of meditation. So here Ngulchu Togmé says, all that appears is the work of one's own mind. The nature of mind is primordially free from conceptual limitations. To recognize this nature and not to entertain concepts of subject and object is the practice of a bodhisattva. So here Ngulchu Togmé is essentially saying everything that appears is the mind. And that mind too has nothing that can be grasped about it. To recognize this fact, that's what we do as practitioners of the path of the bodhisattva. And this is where we do that by not entertaining, not sustaining these dualistic, confused projections of subject and object. So what's basic to this is understanding that we can see that it's our mind that binds us. It's not the object. Our reactions to things as nice, not nice, it's entirely our particular subjective take on things. It has nothing to do with the object itself. It's not as if a strawberry is going to stick its head out and say, hey, you like me. Or, you know, there's a dog turd on the street and that sticks its head out and says, you don't like me, I'm disgusting, or whatever, you know. These ways that we interpret the objects, this is entirely our doing. Now, the issue is, once we are engaged in this, we solidify the subject that's suffering, and also through these reactional patterns, we keep going. And I like, I don't like, I want, I don't want, etc. And this keeps us slaves in samsara. What we need to do is get onto this, and this is where we first need to identify there is a problem. We can see what it is. And then we need to be proactive in eliminating this confusion. And we do that with the practice of meditation. So before we practice meditation, we first what we call establish emptiness. That means that we actually have a view where we understand phenomena don't exist as anything, you could say, inherently existing. And that's where we understand this by seeing how we mistakenly attribute solidity where there in fact is no solidity, and we label all these phenomena that don't have any reality to them at all as existing in this or that way. Yesterday, it was the occasion of the Sagadao Duchen, and we chanted this sutra that's called Questions of an Old Lady. And it's a woman, she's 120 at this point, who asks some amazing questions to the Buddha, and he gives some amazing answers. And one of them is really how she asked, how do phenomena actually really come into existence? How do they abide, and how do they go out of existence? And the Buddha says they never come into existence in the first place. And then he gives, you see, then and this is the kind of stuff we see in the Heart Sutra, but sometimes we're left a bit baffled. The Heart Sutra just says nothing's there, you know. But they can be a bit, you could say, leaves us with a few questions marks, right? But in this sutra, actually, the Buddha unpacks it further, and he would say, take for example a drum. There's a beating of a drum, and he says that sound of the drum is indeed, yes, there is a sound of a drum, but yet, if we look, there's the condition of the stick that hits the drum, the height of the drum, the barrel of the drum, etc. All of these conditions come together. There's not a single one of these that on its own makes this sound, but it's on the basis of these conditions coming together that there is than the resounding of a drum. But nothing in and of itself. We might say, oh, that sounds lovely. We might be attached. We might say, keep drumming, you know, so maybe we don't like it. We say, don't drum. But there's the way that we label things as solidly existing is flawed if we actually analyze and see how the phenomena exist on the basis of conditions coming together. So when we apply this, we begin to loosen up our rigid way of labeling and liking and disliking, and that brings happiness. Basically, because we can never secure phenomena to be the way that we want it. Just like Shantideva says, you can't cover the earth in leather. Better you cover your feet in leather and the job's done. So that's where we would say that to have this insight, it brings happiness, it brings freedom, it brings all the qualities of the mind like compassion. And then Rinpoche quotes this famous quote from the great Mahasiddha Tilopa, who gave an instruction to his student Naropa. And he says, it's not what you perceive that binds you. It is your clinging to it that binds you. Cut through your clinging, Naropa. He probably didn't say it in that insistent way. He probably said it in a really cool way, but you know, the message would have gone through. And Naropa was an extraordinary student. So, but this is something that we so often actually see this quote. Shenpe maching mareda. Sungwe maching shenpe ching. Shenpa churchik naropa. I think that's how the Tibetans say it. So, naively believing our projections are solid, we squander this precious life, because right now we're sufficiently intelligent to have a bit of suffering. We have met the teaching, and if we keep clinging on to our projections as being solid, it would really be such a sad waste of a life where we have this unique opportunity. A mind that is mastered, a mind that's no longer caught up in delusion, that's the only true source of happiness. Everything else will just be temporary happinesses. Very fleeting. And the truth of the matter is there's no reason we should be fooled by our confusion. We are confused, but they can be addressed. This confusion is not basic to us. What we assume is real are really just perceptions. They attain solidity through our beliefs and reactions, basically our projections. So what do? We can analyze these perceived objects of mind, our thoughts, the way that we construct things, the way that we elaborate on things, the way that we believe in things, and we can see whether they actually exist in time or in space in terms of something that has a color or shape. So we could analyze in terms of time. Do they really exist? Have they existed before? Well, they appear to have existed before. Does time, within the time that we can verify, is there such a thing as the past? Is there such a thing as the future? Khyentse Rinpoche goes into some analysis in this context, and also in terms of space, whether we can find something substantial. And when we do this kind of analysis, and this is very basic to the middle way, the Madhyamaka, but also in all the pith-instructions that you find in Mahamudra and in Dzogchen, we'll find that there's nothing that we can grasp as solidly real. So at the same time, and this is where very often philosophers, they go wrong, particularly 20th century philosophers, when they find that there's no truth with a capital T, when they find out there's no, you could say, foundation for philosophy or any kind of absolute principle, they might think, well, then there's nothing. And then they fall into this extreme, which is again very cerebral, philosophical, and dogmatic, of thinking, oh yeah, it's not what we thought it was. That's something is not there, hence there's nothing. But that's also an entirely, you could say, that's an extreme in the sense of, again, a thought that we fixate on, because we can see, it's not as if that when we can't find anything that all of a sudden things go away. We're still here, we still have cognizance, we still have consciousness, we still have perception. There's still a world that operates on the basis of cause and effect. there's what we call this web of dependent arising. So just because things aren't solidly the way that we naively might have believed that they were, either you could say in terms of consciousness or in terms of matter, it doesn't mean that there's nothing. It just means that there's a flux of causes and conditions. There's a lack of solidity, but that doesn't mean that there's a voidness. So we would say in terms of there not being, so lack of solidity doesn't mean that there's nothing. We can look in terms of us, the perceiver. There is definitely a cognitive capacity. Right now you're hearing me, possibly, you're possibly seeing a computer screen. All this, what we call the cognitive capacity, is what we call the clarity aspect, salcha in Tibetan. And it means clarity, but above all, it means really this knowing quality. So due to ignorance, this clarity then, this is where we start samsara, this clarity is reduced and frozen as the self, which is the origin of samsara. All of a sudden, this immense open dimension of clarity sort of shrinks into a self-conscious entity of self. Again, as much as this might take place, if we actually look, then we cannot find a self. Self is a mistaken concept that endures when not examined. That's an important point. If we examine anything, even we just question anything, what is it actually? Who am I actually? What is that actually? Why, where, all of these WH words, they actually penetrate and analyze down to a place where we actually can't find anything in the absolute sense. Khyentse Rinpoche says, the self is a mistaken belief in something that does not exist. Once that concept I is rooted in your mind, it grows and ramifies into a number of associated beliefs, such as my body, my mind, my name. Now, for those of you who are new to this, you might think, are these Buddhists, are they saying that there's nothing there, that I don't exist? We're saying that the degree to which we fixate on this self, to that degree we actually suffer. And it's something that is added, you could say, it's superimposed on our reality. It's superimposed on our experience. It's superimposed on our perceptions. So this self, this comes with basically what we call the skandhas, namely the body and the mind. And if we analyze, we cannot find anything solid there. Although we name this aggregation, Jakob, has no true reality. The name itself has no reality. The object of this name has no reality. Now, the clarity that knows has nothing that can be grasped. So we could look into the mind that is cognizant, and also there we cannot find anything. And yet, while there is nothing that can be grasped, there's still cognizance. This unity of clarity and emptiness is the characteristic of Buddha nature. So what is it that Buddhists they're onto? What is the Buddhist they would say that there is? Well, they would say that we can describe the absolute nature. Of course, here we're just using words and language and concepts, right? The absolute is beyond anything that we can objectify or name or label in any way. It's beyond language, thoughts, any kind of descriptions, right? And yet, we still, just in terms of, for practical purposes, we label this as Buddha nature, and it can be described then in terms of what we call the unity of this cognizant clarity and emptiness. So settling in that, when we familiarize ourselves with that, and this of course is all contingent, dependent on instructions on how to actually do that practically, settling in that will free us of our delusion. It will free our kleshas, meaning our toxic emotions, our karma, meaning our habitual patterns, and eliminating that, freeing us from that, then it allows an innate, natural disposition of wisdom and compassion to dawn. So there is no way that we will have peace as long as we keep believing that they arise because of external objects or circumstances. What is that they again? What am I? Oh yeah, of course. These three: body, mind, and name. Yeah. So as long as we think of them as something that is solidly existing due to external objects, for example, our bodies, sperm, ovum, and so forth, they arise on the basis of conditions, but the solidity is something that we attribute to us, and that's where they don't have any absolute reality. So the more that we attempt to reject external phenomena, the more they spring back at you. This is something that we can verify in our experience. When we push things away in reaction, then very often we just end up having more traction. The phenomena end up having, there's something that bothers us, right? And the more we actually begin to make a drama out of it, the more it becomes a reality. So that's where that drama and our particular way of solidifying things, that is something that comes from the thoughts. So this is where we need to recognize what thoughts actually are. Khyentse Rinpoche then gives this example from coming from a place where you would deal with pigs a lot. So we have to be a little bit cosmopolitan here and sort of imagine what we're actually talking about. He says, if you throw a stone at the nose of a pig, it will immediately turn around and run away. Likewise, whenever a thought develops, recognize it as being empty. That thought will immediately lose its compelling power and will not generate attachment and hatred. And once attachment and hatred are gone, realization of the perfectly pure Dharma will unfold naturally from within. It doesn't mean these thoughts won't come up, but it means that when we recognize their nature, that we don't fixate on them, they don't exert any power over us, then the arising of attachment and hatred doesn't gain any traction with us. And it's there we begin to discover some confidence and autonomy from you could say, the dictate of the ordinary impulses of attachment and hatred. And that's where we gain some freedom, discover that wider perspective. So to break our ignorant habits, we need to be proactive through the meditation practice of shamatha and vipassana. It's there where we are not just saying, okay, I believe everything is empty, that's the Buddha's right, okay, I can analyze, I can see the logic in that. That's not going to cut it. We're going to have to really familiarize ourselves through actual sitting practice, which is work. This goes counter to our restless, fidgety grain. And that's where the practice of meditation has to be done properly, according to proper instructions, and actually us engaging then in this practice. But it is so helpful in terms of dealing with what's happening in our mind. Such practice unveils the natural state, which is the goal of all Dharma. The particular approach of the Mahayana is to look The particular approach of Mahayana is to look into the reality of phenomena. This is so beautiful. We're not trying to seek some sort of truth from outside. We're really just looking at what is the nature of things. Rinpoche says, in truth, if you cannot tame your own mind, what else is there to tame? What is the use of doing many other practices? The aim of the whole Buddhist path, both the basic and the great vehicles, is to tame and understand the mind. So everything we're doing has this objective. And since mind is what lies at the root of all our experiences, it's that which really is the most important project. And it's not going to, like Togurjen says, we can't blow it up. It's the only way to do this is actually, we call it taming the mind. It just means mastering and not being deceived by our habitual ignorance. So this is some instruction that encourages us to pursue then meditation on this absolute bodhicitta. Now, the post-meditation, when we arise from such meditation, then what we want to do is abandon any beliefs in these objects that we're going to encounter, some which we like, some which we don't like. And we're going to look at two ways that we react, namely with desire as truly existing and aversion as truly existing. So we mean that this is a good thing or this is a bad thing. Of course, yes, but definitely it's a good thing to run the water in our bath so that it's not too hot. It would be bad to get into a bathtub full of hot water. But the point is, we need to operate with what we call the two truths. So we understand, of course, how things are experienced from our convenience and our point of view. Sure, that's what we call relative truth. But it's through understanding absolute truth that we begin to have an aerial perspective that sees things independently of how we construct them. So we engage in this practice also in the post-meditation, and that's where we look at the objects of desire. Ngulchu Togmé says, when encountering objects which please us, to view them like rainbows in summer, not ultimately real, however beautiful they appear, and to relinquish craving and attachment is the practice of a bodhisattva. So the wants of the mind are endless. Best to have a contented mind. This is where Nagarjuna and Alfred Nobel, they coincide in that they have both said, of all riches, contentment is the greatest. And so if we have a contented mind, we're good. If we want something and get it, then once we have that, then we want more, like drinking salt water. Craving by its nature brings only trouble and dissatisfaction. We get over our superficial obsessions by remembering the brevity of our life. So we can look and we can see how the various ways that we pursue things that we want, and we can see that in the end we just have difficulties. Once we begin to have one thing, then we have more difficulties. Like Paltram just says, once you have a goat, you have goat problems. So once you have computers, once you have cars, once you have all these things which we have, right? Well, we can all confirm that's when we begin to have, computer-related problems, car-related problems, and the list goes on, right? So how do we put an end to this? Well, we very often are just caught up in some rather short-sighted perspectives. And what actually is rather sobering is remembering that we're not going to be here very long. So it doesn't really matter that much. So that's with regards to things that please us, objects of desire. Then abandoning any belief in the object of aversion as truly existing. The various forms of suffering are like the death of one's child in a dream. By clinging to deluded perceptions as real, we exhaust ourselves. Therefore, when encountering unfavorable circumstances, to view them as illusions is the practice of a bodhisattva. So to fight or resent the unwanted is to give ourselves over to be ruled by anger. When we begin to struggle with the objects as being unwanted, it solidifies our attitude, it solidifies the object. And because we're very particularly anger solidifies things very strongly, the perceptions come back at us. That's where we say this is how hell is constructed, where we then have an increasingly hostile environment that perpetuates our experience of anger, which in turn then fuels further the experience of the hostile environment. So the instruction is to train our mind in one. When we come across things that are undesirable, we recognize it's our karma. It doesn't come out of the blue. We don't believe in sort of some mystery. It's cause and effect. So we understand that things arise due to karma. When we don't react and when we don't perpetuate a drama around whatever is happening, recognizing it's karma, or however we deal with it, but not getting agitated, this actually exhausts the karma, the pattern that has been, you could say, ongoing begins to lose its grip on us, and this is what we call purification of our karma. So this attitude of acceptance, in turn, it's very much something that makes our life much easier. So we should think about how much suffering there is in the world on the basis of anger, and we should pray that our suffering, when we are suffering ourselves and we find it undesirable, then we should say, well, this is purifying this is my karma, it's purifying my karma, and I pray that whatever difficulty I'm going through, may this purify the suffering of others. Now we might think, hey, wait a minute, this is not going to create world peace or take away the suffering of others. No, but it enables us to have an attitude of acceptance, and also it inevitably engages our mind in terms of seeing a wider perspective of compassion. So we should see the joys and sorrows that we undergo as happening. These are happening, but we should stop filtering them through this narrow, fussy filter of what we like and dislike. And to actually do that, we could just see them as if they were a movie. This will make us able to be more present within the vivid reality of whatever it is, rather than removing ourselves from it. So that's where just thinking it's a movie, thinking it's a mirage or whatever, it enables us to actually face things in a more in a more direct way. So we've now we're still in this section about the for individuals of superior capacity, and we've covered the bodhicitta of aspiration, we've covered the bodhicitta of application, and now the rest of the book actually will be then precepts for training in those practices. So we're going to look in some detail in the training in the 6 transcendent perfections, the 6 paramitas, and then there will be 4 then that follow, namely training in the 4 instructions taught in the sutra, training in how to be rid of negative emotions, training in accomplishing others' good with mindfulness and vigilance, and then dedicating the merit to perfect enlightenment. Okay, we'll have a look at that. I'm just going to see if there's some questions here. How can we acknowledge what to abandon and what to adopt for ourselves without labeling dualistically, like and dislike? We need to do that. And in relative truth, it's essential that we adopt and abandon things. There's definitely things that we need to abandon, the causes of suffering, and we need to adopt the causes of happiness for ourselves, also for others. So in relative truth, we need to be pragmatic and also be very aware of cause and effect. In absolute truth, then we see that these labels, they only exist in terms of dependent arising constructs, that they have no absolute reality. But us presently, like I started off saying, we have to acknowledge that we are very much situated within a situation of experiencing self and others, and experience our whole world in terms of cause and effect. As long as we do that, then we're dependent on the causes that bring happiness, and pursuing causes that bring happiness, abandoning the causes that bring suffering. So these paramitas, training in the 6 transcendent perfections, the paramitas have 4 characteristics. They work as antidotes. They are reinforced with wisdom. They become more powerful through wisdom, and they benefit others temporarily and also ultimately. So, for example, generosity is something that works against miserliness. It's an antidote to toxic conditions in our mind. And this generosity is not just an antidote in terms of an immediate problem, but it actually connects us with the nature of reality when we abandon the notion of subject, object, and action. That's where we'll look at this in this discussion, but this is what we call reinforced with wisdom, that we align ourselves with how things actually are. And this benefits others temporarily and ultimately. So Ngulchu Togmé says, if those who wish for enlightenment must give away even their own bodies. How much more should it be true of material objects? Therefore, without expectation of result or reward, to give with generosity is the practice of the bodhisattva. So we should right away say that we're not expected at this point to give away our own bodies. That's you could say the scope of great bodhisattvas, and it really shouldn't be also be taken literally in this, or rather, we shouldn't get overly literal here and think, oh, bodhisattvas, they're these people who give up their own bodies. It really just means that the bodhisattva is not attached even to the most precious belonging, which is our own body. So it's that's just that fearlessness. And we admire people like that. We admire people, heroes, that are willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. We're willing. We appreciate that kind of courage, and they do it not just for bravado, but they do it because there will be a context in which it's helpful. So basically, just means there's unconditional compassion and concern for others. And so, of course, if you can give away that, then yes, obviously, also we're talking about giving away basically, also material objects. We talk about three kinds of bodhisattvas, three kinds of generosity: the generosity of material objects, the generosity of providing safety, and the generosity of providing the Dharma. So generosity is natural for the bodhisattva. It serves to eliminate miserliness and to accumulate merit. With the wealth of merit, we can benefit others. So giving is something that basically cultivates a mind of wealth, of richness. And this also spills into our experience. And it also accumulates a lot of, particularly when we do it, when we make offerings, for example, to the three jewels, or very much dedicated to the enlightenment of sentient beings, we accumulate something that connects us to the path, namely merit. And it's through this we establish the causes and conditions through which we can benefit others. Now, when we give, we should give without clinging, and we should also give with wisdom and bodhicitta. So we are giving that which is helpful, and also we're giving without we aspire to give without clinging to subject, object, and action. So like I said before, there's three kinds of generosity: material generosity, protecting us from fear. There's material generosity, the generosity protecting from fear, and the generosity of Dharma. The next then is transcendent discipline. It says, if lacking discipline, one cannot accomplish one's own good, it's laughable to think of accomplishing the good of others. Therefore, to observe discipline without samsaric motives is the practice of a bodhisattva. So we need to have discipline, quite simply just knowing what's what and what's good, what's not good, to simply observe that as almost like a no-brainer, just simple. Discipline shouldn't be something where we're struggling. It's just knowing that, eating good food is helpful, so that we don't need to think about, should I really eat, should I drink petrol? Should I eat, dirt or whatever? It's like, it's obvious. So we have that knowledge of what's useful and what's not useful. And we should do this without samsaric motives, is that we're not just doing it to be, for our own sake. We're doing this as a practice of a bodhisattva. So we would say discipline is the foundation for all qualities of the path. Without discipline, our path is not going to go anywhere. And that's where we have various styles of vows of the individual liberation, which are the foundation, the vows of pratimoksha, and then we have the vows of the bodhisattva, and then we have the vajrayana samaya, the vows of the vidyadharas. So these are all particular aspects of discipline then that we abide by. As far as presently, just summing them up, we would say the vows of individual liberation is the vow not to harm others. The vow of bodhisattva is to benefit others, and the vow of the Vajrayana is pure perception. But these are all, you could say, big topics, so we're not going to go into depth here. But all along, this is something that is intended to take us away from the causes of suffering and negative patterns and enable us to connect with the path and integrate the vision and practice of the path. So discipline is indispensable. So we should be careful with it. We should look after it. Just like we're nurturing a crop, then we should look after our discipline. Discipline is something that gives us peace of mind. 27. For a bodhisattva who desires the joys of virtue, all who harm him are like a precious treasure. Therefore, to cultivate patience toward all, without resentment, is the practice of the bodhisattva. So this is quite radical. This is the practice of patience. And of course, patience is we can bear things and so on, we can bear things, but it's more than that, much more than that. It's actually the joy of being sort of encountering something that's difficult. The Buddhas won't give us a hard time. The Dalai Lama is not going to give us a hard time. It's only thanks to certain persons and unfortunate circumstances that we really have the opportunity to practice this essential practice of patience. So that's why we would say anybody who harms the bodhisattva will say, oh, thank you, this is a precious, precious opportunity. So we would say three kinds of patience: the patience that bears anger, what we're talking about here. Then there's enduring hardships for the sake of practicing the Dharma. That's various kinds of just difficulties that we might have when we're practicing Dharma. We might, we might sometimes suffer in terms of hardships. It might be difficult for us to sit. For example, if we meditate, we might feel fidgety. We might think it's hard work to sit and meditate. These kind of things. But because Dharma is taking us out of the way that we normally do things. And then, of course, we can look at people who practice incredible hardships like Jetsun Milarepa, who stayed for 12 years up in the caves around Mount Everest. And then we have patience in regard to the profound meaning, which is being able to actually bear the fact that there's nothing that we can ultimately grasp. This is what we call the patience in regard to emptiness. So on the path, those who harm us will do us far more good than any well-disposed friend. That's where I think last time we quoted Paltrimji, right, who said, I like suffering. I don't like happiness. If I suffer, my mind goes towards the Dharma. When I'm happy, the kleshas they blaze. So Shantideva, however, about the need for practicing patience, this is in chapter 6 in the Way of the Bodhisattva. He says, no evil is there similar to anger. No austerity can be compared with patience. I think we had that quote too early on. So the enemy of anger needs to be subdued with the armies of loving kindness. So we have loving kindness. It might just be hidden, but we bring it out. And when we have anger, then we soak our mind with loving kindness. Not easy, but it's essential that we do it. It's not what we normally do, but now we're practicing the Dharma. We're no longer doing what we normally do because that's what has brought suffering for so long. So this is where the trick here is then to have that upbeat capacity to bring out loving kindness when we're angry. We should ultimately understand that the constructions of the harm doer, the harm itself, and the harmed one, they are ungraspable. So that's where we understand relatively how it's valuable to deal with anger, but we also understand on the absolute what we construct as somebody out there who's harming us or something, the actual harm in ourselves. There's nothing that possesses inherent existence. So Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche says, Seeing all such situations in this way, train yourself not to get upset when someone harms you, not to seek revenge, and never to bear the slightest grudge. So it's very important that patience doesn't mean that we end up with this sort of passive-aggressive situation of, bearing it, but then again, we're actually secretly really resenting it. So we should have patience in persevering in the practice of Dharma. That's the second kind. And that's where right now we have the opportunity to practice the Dharma, which is so unique considering how we, in endless lifetimes, just circle in samsara. So that's where we should practice with joy, just as a man that's freed from death row. Some Khyentse Rinpoche is saying somebody on their way to being executed, they're all of a sudden being given a pardon. That kind of joy. So we should then ultimately, and then the third kind is we should have patience in facing the truth of the Dharma, the uncompounded absolute nature. So that's the nature of emptiness. Khyentse Rinpoche says, when Lord Buddha taught the profound teachings on emptiness, some of the monks who were present reacted to the deep truth of the teaching with panic so intense that they vomited blood and died forthwith. These truths are by no means easy to fathom, but it is of the utmost importance to try to grasp their true meaning and not to have a negative view of them. So we might come across teachings, as we do in the Prajnaparamita and the Madhyamika teachings, that are really difficult to understand. And also, what's a bit deceptive, if we come across Mahamudra and Dzogchen teachings, they might seem very sort of appealing. We might sort of go, oh, I like that, but it's deceptive because they are in fact teaching us how skillfully how to accommodate this nature that cannot be grasped. The Madhyamika teachings, they are more explicit in sort of highlighting how there's nothing that we can actually grasp. And so it's important that we're patient and we give ourselves time to familiarize ourselves with these perspectives. So, transcendent diligence, merely for their own sake. Even Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas make efforts like someone whose hair is on fire, trying to put it out. Seeing this for the sake of all beings, to practice diligence, the source of excellent qualities, is the practice of a bodhisattva. So Khyentse Rinpoche says, diligence is the joyous effort and active determination to carry out positive actions without any expectations or self-satisfaction. There's three kinds: almond-like diligence, active diligence, and unstoppable diligence. So this is where we're never deterred, we're always proactive, and we have this continual joy actually of just being enthusiastic about what we're engaging in. So there's this diligence also in Sanskrit, it's virya. It means this joy, enthusiasm, vigor. Three kinds of laziness: idle laziness, the self-deprecating laziness, neglecting what matters. So idle laziness is just sloth. Self-deprecating is not trusting ourselves. Neglecting what matters is not getting our priorities right. Without diligence, nothing happens on the path. So without application, then we might be called Buddhists and we might have all the right things and look the Buddhist part. But without applying the teachings with diligence, then nothing really shifts. Establishing Buddhism, particularly then in the modern world, is dependent on our diligent practicing of hearing, reflecting, and meditation. So we maybe want to bring Buddhism into the modern world. Well, it really depends on us actually engaging in these aspects: hearing, reflecting, and meditating. When we're serving sentient beings, we should do this just like parents that care for their children. We're not expecting them to thank us. We're just looking after them selflessly. So to increase our diligence then, to us to really actually engage in diligence, like it said, just like our hair caught on fire, we apply ourselves. Khyentse Rinpoche says, think how shallow and superficial this life's ordinary concerns really are in that light, and how free you could be if you could turn your mind away from them if you suddenly realize that in your lap, in the fold of your clothes, a venomous snake was hiding? Would you wait to take action even for a second? So then transcendent concentration, knowing that through profound insight, thoroughly grounded in sustained calm, the disturbing emotions are completely conquered. To practice concentration, which utterly transcends the four formless states, is the practice of a bodhisattva. So these two aspects, shamatha and vipassana. Shamatha, the sustained calm; vipassana, profound insight. So we should have this insight. We need this insight that will free us from samsara, from confusion. That's what enables us to see through the hoax. But it requires that our mind is calm. Rinpoche gives the example of if you have a flame, if you protect it, then you actually have a lamp. Whereas if the flame is just sitting out in the wind, it could go out any time. So this insight is what is going to free us. Not just that we're going to be calm, but is that we're going to see through the basic deception that entangles us. And it's through that then that the disturbing emotions are pacified. So for us to tame ourselves, we need to tame the mind first. The mind, after all, is what we call the doer of all. The mind is the boss. So we need peace in order to practice shamatha and vipassana. And that's where it can be helpful to have circumstances. We create circumstances just by finding a moment where we could have some quiet. We needn't impose on others, but we could find moments where we just have some space. We needn't tell anyone, we needn't do anything particular. And then we practice then finding, being able to just sustain calm in our mind on the basis of course, we need instructions. In the nth degree, if we can, yes, then we would perhaps have a place where we meditate, or we might even go to a particular location where it's particularly peaceful. But this is helpful to somehow begin to touch on a place of quiet, a place on peace, a place where we can sustain calm. This will be very helpful. And then once we have that peace, then we look into the nature of the objects, the nature of our world, and also the one who's meditating. To look into the nature of the object and the meditating subject, this is vipassana. So Khyentse Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche actually in the book, and this is in the edition that I have, which is from Shambhala, on page 166 to 168. I have the old edition here from Shichen. He gives some really good advice on how to actually practice this Buddha sadhana. We call it the Buddha sadhana. It's called the Treasury of Blessings, and it's a liturgy that we very often chant. Yesterday at Sagadao Duchen we chanted it. We chant it every morning as part of the morning meditation from 7:30 onwards. And also on Mondays, when we do the Abhidharma study, we chant it there. So it's something that's chanted all around. And Khyentse Rinpoche gives some very detailed advice, actually, on how to effectively use this practice as shamatha and vipassana meditation. So Ngulchu Togmé says, all appearances are one's own mind. Mind itself is primordially beyond conceptual extremes, undistracted by dualistic subject-object notions. To remain one-pointed is called perfect concentration. So if we could settle in this freedom from subject-object duality, that would be good. That we could call meditation. Until then, we practice like Khyentse Rinpoche instructs here in conjunction with focusing on the Buddha, or coming back, practicing mindfulness on the basis of some object of mindfulness. And then eventually this experience of non-duality will dawn on us. Now we come to the practice of transcendent wisdom. So it says, in the absence of wisdom, perfect enlightenment cannot be attained through the other 5 perfections alone. Therefore, to cultivate wisdom combined with skillful means and free from the 3 concepts is the practice of a bodhisattva. So this is where all the paramitas, the transcendent virtues, they all really gain their power. It's through this wisdom. So as much as we're practicing generosity, if we're practicing generosity with strings attached, then it's not that generous, really. It's only when we actually give without any notion of I am giving this to you, then actually we really say that the perfections become the path for enlightenment. So that insight, or that freedom, if you like, that is what we call wisdom. So again, referring to the 6 paramitas, the first 5 then are, as it says here, they are important, but they are conceptual. Giving, me, you, the object, etc. The more we're free from that, then we really begin to have, you could say, the conditions for enlightenment. So we say without wisdom or prajna, the other paramitas don't qualify as such. Now, how do we then gain this wisdom? Well, it arises from hearing, meaning studying, critical thinking, reflection, and integrating that in our mind stream, meditation. Khyentse Rinpoche says, you, the practitioner, should first of all be like a bee going from flower to flower collecting nectar. At the stage when you're listening to and studying the teaching, learn all of them carefully in both words and meaning. Then you should be like a wild animal, not satisfied with a mere theoretical understanding. Go and live in mountain solitudes where you can be free of all the busy involvement in ordinary life. Be self-sufficient and firm in one-pointed practice as you discover directly for yourself the profound meaning of the teachings. Finally, as you put the teaching into practice and integrate them with your being, you should be like a peg driven into hard ground, unshaken by thoughts during meditation, remain unwavering, cut all limiting concepts of existence and non-existence from within, and directly encounter the face of the ultimate nature of everything. So we should first study and really, like a bee. Bee is somebody that goes here and there and never harms the flowers. They just take the nectar, move on. Then we should be someone who perseveres. Now in our culture, again and again, what comes up obviously, that's, you could say, the difference between a place like Tibet and other Buddhist civilizations where there are plenty of opportunities to, and plenty of accommodation really, to go off and practice. That's not the case in our present modern world, but we can try. Just find, like I said before, find little places where we can begin to integrate the teaching, and then at that time, then also we should, when we really have certainty, then we should persevere in not being confused, not being deluded. So we have these 3: wisdom of hearing, reflecting, and meditating. So when we talk about the wisdom of hearing, meaning there's the teachings, then we talk about the 2 traditions of the profound and the vast. The profound, the lineage from Nagarjuna, the Madhyamika, is very much about understanding the absolute reality, and Rinpoche quotes a couple of sutras there. And then we have the vast, which is the teaching from Asanga, which is more about mapping all the path. So these are the teachings that we have. There are many different teachings, but for example, these 2 set of teachings are really important for the Mahayana. They're associated with what we call the Madhyamika and the Yogacarya. So once we hear the teachings, then we should think critically about them. We should understand how they fit into our experience so that we don't hesitate. And that's where we see their relevance. So we should gain certainty. Now, in our studies, we also distinguish between two kinds of teachings, which are the expedient, which is sort of more conventional according to how people think and what's convenient. You know, for example, we could say the teaching on Mount Meru and the 4 continents. That's how in old India, that's how they would see the world. Of course, when we come across Buddhist teachings, there's a description of Mount Meru and the 4 continents. We say, well, that doesn't exactly correspond with our sort of heliocentric universe and the idea of the planets and what have you. So that's where we might say, oh yeah, well, that's a Buddhist belief. I'm not believing in Buddhism, but that's secondary. That just has to do with presenting some material. And we would in fact say as long as we operate with the notion of cause and effect, then we're still within the realm of the expedient teachings. Khyentse Rinpoche talks about these as Cinderella teachings. So that's where we believe in me, you, New York City, you know, the world, all of that. Sure, that's sort of according to our perceptions, right? But these have no ultimate reality. Still, they're very helpful because these are realities that we believe in, right? And then there's definitive teachings. That is the teachings that point out what is the actual nature of the teachings. And that's where we have teachings like the Prajna Paramita. So, and then we have the wisdom of meditation, shamatha and vipassana. So these, they go beyond just the, you could say, the intellectual exercise of hearing and thinking. They have to do with actual integrating experience. And that's where we need then calm abiding and insight, shamatha and vipassana. So when we begin to see reality, seeing how we can't, there's nothing that can be grasped, seeing emptiness, it eliminates the delusional belief in I. And in the end, it actually is what brings us to seeing the absence of this duality of self and other. So when we have this freedom from self and other, this is where we begin to naturally have this experience of selflessness. And selflessness is where we're no longer deluded about the nature of things. And from that point, they're no longer bound, held in the insecurity and neurosis of self-centering. Then naturally the warmth of compassion and love manifests. So we would say that with the paramita of wisdom, the other 5 attain their true value. Like I said, when you have, for example, generosity, it's far greater when it's not based on this situation with strings attached between I'm giving to you and so on. So Khyentse Rinpoche says, a thorough experiential understanding of emptiness is the only antidote to the belief in an I, in a truly existing self. Once you recognize emptiness, all your attachment to such a self will vanish without a trace. Realization will blaze forth like a brilliant sun rising in the sky, transforming darkness into light. So this is where presently, due to our obscurations, being held back with this delusional fixation on a self, that we basically live in darkness. And that's where what we're proposing here is eliminating that which holds us in the shadows, so that we will unveil that which has always been, which is the natural condition without any obscuration. So that's where we need to apply this perspective, our view, practically. We integrate it through meditation and what we call post-meditation, ordinary life. So with realization, then eventually somebody who's a great yogi, there's no difference between meditation and post-meditation. So once we have that, with this kind of realization, wisdom and compassion is something that enables us spontaneously to lead others, to guide others. Khyentse Rinpoche says, for the more you realize emptiness, the less there will be any impediment to the arising of compassion. With it will come a natural ability to benefit others without effort. In the same way that if among 100 blind people, one of them were to recover his sight, he would be able to guide all the others. And Khyentse Rinpoche says, Without the realization of emptiness, both love and compassion are limited and narrow. As the Bodhisattva Bhumi explains, there are 3 successive levels of boundless love, compassion, joy, and impartiality. So with wisdom, then these 4 boundless, they will increase. First, so we have love, compassion, joy, and impartiality. First, these will have sentient beings as their object. Like, for example, with compassion, we would want all these sentient beings that are suffering to be free of suffering, and so forth. Then secondly, then we have this kind of compassion and loving kindness, joy, and equanimity that takes phenomena as their object. That means without kind of caring these 4 boundless that has sentient beings as their object, we realize that sentient beings, they're suffering because they don't understand the nature of reality. It's not just that we're upset with them, that we have compassion and love, etc., on the basis of seeing their suffering, wishing their happiness, and so on. It's that we understand that there's a whole misunderstanding, a delusional condition that's taking place. That's the tragedy. And that's much more pervasive. It's not just specifically about sentient beings here and their suffering, but it's really understanding the whole scope of samsara, and that's much greater compassion. Finally, we have the compassion, and the others also, which is free from any duality of subject, object, and action. That's an entirely then non-referential quality of these 4, and it's there where they really attain their complete power, because they're no longer bound by this duality. So Khyentse Rinpoche says that intrinsic lack of substantial existence, omnipresent and vivid, unceasingly radiates a love that is lucid and spontaneous. This kind of love is by nature free of all concepts and without any goal. So we should really, of course, it's difficult for us to imagine and understand, but it really is something we should keep in mind, that the outcome of enlightenment and the outcome of what we're describing here and proposing here really is something that is vast and very powerful, and is intrinsically this thing that all beings everywhere at all times strive for, which is love, the quality of simply abiding in this joy that embraces others. So for us to practically begin to have some understanding of what wisdom is, we need to not just study, but we also need to have practice of settling the mind and beginning to have this freedom from the entanglement in the ordinary concepts. So we need to join practice with the study of, say, Madhyamika, and this will then enable us to understand what we talk about when we say absolute and relative reality, the 2 truths. And that in turn then will bring about this unity, the intrinsic, you could say, seamless unity of compassion and wisdom. And that is the ultimate fruition of the bodhisattva path. Why is it seamless? Why is it a unity? Because wisdom without compassion would really just be an absorption, and it wouldn't be wisdom. And compassion without wisdom would still have strings attached, would still be loving others, but thinking in terms of them and us and so forth. So when these 2 are united, and this is where we need to understand the path is not just some, you could say, spiritual dimension in which we are self-absorbed in some nirvana. It's something that embodies everything that we would attribute as being the highest qualities there ever could be, these 2, wisdom and compassion. Seeing that they exist as a unity is really then the ultimate fruition of the bodhisattva path. So Khyentse Rinpoche says, you will reach a point when you see that emptiness and compassion, emptiness and phenomena, and absolute and relative truth are intrinsically one, rather than being in each case 2 separate entities like the horns of a goat. The vaster your view of emptiness, the clearer your understanding will be of the infinite ways phenomena can manifest in accordance with the laws of cause and effect. And it is from emptiness inseparable, and it is from emptiness inseparable from compassion. And it is. From emptiness inseparable from compassion that a bodhisattva manifests. I'll just see if there's some questions here. Okay. One of my families passed away, unfortunately, and his son is suffering, sudden suffering immensely. His father devoted himself to serve his family all his life and take care of his old mother after retirement in the recent years. The son planned to travel and have a relax with his father when possible afterwards. But now the son regrets that he does not have the opportunity anymore. It seems it does not work if I tell him this is deluded phenomena like a dream. At this point, could you please share some insight on how to help him? Thank you very much. You know, this is what we always say, you know, and just like we have a little shoot, a little plant that's coming up, you know, we need to nourish it till it actually grows into a tree that provides medicine. Until then, we can't begin to trim it or take off the little sort of sprouts and think that we're getting the medicine. We should wait till it's there. And likewise, us practicing the path, we should really first cultivate the path and the qualities of the path before we can reach out to others and really help them. Of course, we can still help them with our good intention. And you know, you're the son of the man who passed away, of course, will sense your empathy and your kindness, and that's already a big deal. So you can, as you're with this person and you're aspiring to all the qualities of the bodhisattva path, you needn't explain them to this person. Just be there. Take the person out, take him to the movies, distract him, take walks with him, and so on. If he asks you, yes, well, then you can say, well, the Buddha said, this is the nature of our reality. Presently, what we call samsara is that things are impermanent. That we can't escape. Everybody will die. There was a story of the Buddha. Once a mother came to the Buddha and her child had passed away. And she said, please, Buddha, bring him back from the other side. And he says, the Buddha said, he understood the woman and he knew it wouldn't help to maybe explain impermanence right away. So he said, okay, I'll see what I can do. Can you please go and collect some sesame seeds from houses that have never known death? Can you find some people who have never encountered death? And please collect some sesame seeds from these people. These sesame seeds we can maybe do something with. So the woman went around and she knocked on doors everywhere and talked to people everywhere, asking if there was anybody there that had never, she needed to find somebody that had never come across death. She didn't find anybody. So then she came back to the Buddha and said, I couldn't find anybody who hasn't experienced death, so I couldn't bring any of these sesame seeds back. The Buddha said, yes, that's right. Yeah, mustard seeds. Okay, thank you. And so then the woman, it dawned on the woman what the Buddha was trying to tell her. But you know, sharing wisdom with people, unless they really ask for it, is very difficult. So we can do it as a gesture of kindness, but we shouldn't expect them to understand. And sometimes even when we present it as a truth, it might just annoy people. Maybe not. If they sense our goodness behind it, then it's different. But it somehow, people might say, yeah, that's all very easy to say. These Buddhists, they have all the answers, but it's very difficult. And that's where it's not easy to find the right moment where where we really can say something that makes sense to people and actually makes them click, you know. But so that's why I think always it's more helpful to just be there in terms of just really embracing this person with a lot of warmth and kindness. And then maybe, yes, maybe at one point the person might sort of ask some questions like that. Then of course you should share. You say, yes, there's a whole path that accommodates this situation. Okay. So next time, please read the verses 31 to 37, basically the training in the last 4 precepts. And then there's some concluding verses also. So we're basically going to finish the text. The following time after that, we're going to look at the appendix. Are we? Let me just check. Yeah, we have a whole series of appendix. I think they come from Satrul Nawang Nobu, if I'm not wrong. This is Trungpa Rinpoche's teaching. Anyway, we'll be looking at that. So, may bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Thank you. See this one. Okay, good. Okay, see you next week.